Hi there. My name is Lucas Weiss, and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. For today's episode, I'm joined by Bob Elliott. Bob is a Hall of Fame baseball writer who's currently the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Baseball Network and a former Toronto Blue Jays beat writer at the Toronto Sun. In this episode, we discuss a variety of topics, from the MLB Draft to Bob's new book, If the Walls Could Talk. Bob shares his memories of the 2015 and 2016 Blue Jays teams, as well as Larry Walker, who's currently the second Canadian to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. If you enjoy the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, make sure to subscribe to my channel on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. This is episode 7 of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. Listen, Bob, thank you so much for joining the show. It really is an honor to be able to speak with you, and we're going to get into your new book, but I wanted to start off by getting your thoughts on yesterday's news from Major League Baseball on the MLB Draft. And for those of you who don't know, Ken Rosenthal wrote a report yesterday saying that the MLB Draft is going to be reduced to 5 rounds. Bob, you're very much in touch with a lot of the Canadian prospects. What are your thoughts on the impact of this reducing the draft to 5 rounds?
Well, it's terrible news for Canadian kids. They initially they had talked about doing 5 rounds, Lucas, and then Boris got into it, and he wanted 10, and obviously, I guess he was not successful, but they. In getting it to go to 10, but they, like I looked it up, like I think an average of 20 kids or 18 kids, I forget what it was, Canadians get drafted between the 6th and the 40th. And that's the past 8 years. And prior to that, it was 50 rounds. And when they dropped it, I think, it was an average of 8 Canadian kids that weren't drafted. So it's not ideal, but I guess this will make a decision easier whether you sign or whether you go to school, whether you go to university.
So do you expect a lot of these kids then just to go to university then? Like, are you expecting?
The high school kids, yes. And I think the college kids, I'm not sure about that because this is uncharted waters. I knew they gave the seniors, they gave them, they said, whatever it was, 15 games or 12 games, whatever it was. They said that didn't count. So the seniors are allowed to come back. But I also heard stories that they were going to allow, like, if you were a freshman this year, you could be a freshman next year. So that makes it difficult for, if you're going to a certain university, you're moving into their, there's a logjam in front of you.
Mm.
But we did a story on that Jordan Nagawa, who's at Michigan, and I said, and they went to the College World Series last year. He's their left fielder. He was born in Ottawa, and he said that I said, well, that's good. You get everybody back, and he said, no, not really, because he said a lot of the seniors had already accepted jobs and they're ready to move on with their life.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, as you say, definitely not great news for Canadians and also the Toronto Blue Jays because they were drafting 5th. And,
right.
And as you know, Bob, I mean, a lot of these picks, later on in the draft, are helpful for a team, building their farm system.
Oh, right. There's been lots of guys that have made it. Chris Woodward, who was not a Hall of Famer, but I mean, he played for a number of years. I think he was a 53rd round pick. Piazza, who was a Hall of Famer, was 62nd rounder. Back when you could draft unlimited, they used to go up until I think they went up until 75 or until you got tired of picking. So that was his team's last pick. Piazza was, and it was just as a favor, and he wound up in the Hall of Fame. Pretty
amazing.
Yep.
And Bob, I mean, from your understanding of this, was this a move that is a consequence of the pandemic, or was this going to happen regardless of pandemic?
No, I think it's like last year you would see the slot bonus money for the first 10 rounds, and then you could pay an 11th rounder, you could pay 100,000, or you could pay extra. Like there was a kid from Brampton last year, TJ Schofield. I think he got 310 from Oakland, and because they had money left over, you could spend your leftover money on a guy who was down. I think he was about the 14th round or 15th round, something like that. But the way this is there's no revenue coming in, and so they're only going to get slot money for the first 5 picks, and then after that, like if you're the 6th pick, the most you can sign for is 20,000. So the kids, they're better off. The seniors that are have the option of signing, they're better off staying in school, I think.
Yeah, I mean, get that experience, right? And go and, get your degree because, yeah, I agree with you. I think that's for sure what a lot of kids you're going to see end up doing. Bob, let's shift gears to your book, If the Walls Could Talk, which got released last month. For any Blue Jays fan, it's a great read, and I definitely recommend you getting it. I know bookstores are closed now, but thank goodness for Amazon to deliver to your house. But maybe, Bob, just start back how this book came to fruition.
Well, I've had people tell me it's the worst time to release a book because there's no baseball, so nobody's interested. And I've had others say it's the best time because nobody's doing anything. All they're doing is sitting around reading. So I'm not sure. But how it came, I guess I turned down, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 books. But this Lance Hornby, the hockey writer, he had done one, and he talked me into doing it. And it's a collection of stories and of they're only doing it's a series, they do it on like the St. Louis Cardinals or the Oakland A's or the St. Louis what's the name of the football team with Kurt Warner in St. Louis?
St. Louis Rams.
The Rams.
Now the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, they did it all on they're out of Chicago, and they do the series on teams that have won championships. So that's how that was a selling point for me. And then, of course, the 2 years under Alex Anthopoulos were pretty exciting years as well.
We're going to get to those 2 years, but I wanted to ask you as a writer, because anyone that knows you, you are an encyclopedia of Blue Jays stories. How do you decide what stories get included and what don't? Because I imagine you have stories that aren't going to be in the book.
Oh, yes, for sure. Yes. Well, there was direction from the people in Chicago and what they were kind of looking for. And they sent me a San Francisco Giants book, Dallas Cowboys book, and a hockey book. I didn't read the hockey or the football book, but I did look at the table of contents. So you had an idea of what they were looking for and how they handled it and how they did special chapters on significant players in their franchise history.
Why did you decide to start the book with reliever Ken Daly?
Because that is he's a guy. He only pitched 5 2/3, and he had vertigo. And if you looked at it on the surface, you'd say, well, that was a bad sign. In 3 years, that's all he pitched. But the thing is, they beat the Dodgers. They out-hustled the Dodgers. They outsold a player on coming to Toronto, coming north to Toronto. He came here Grey Cup weekend. He stayed at the Four Seasons, and he saw the city, and he liked it. And Jim Acker helped, and that was, so that happened. And after Daly, they then went to Chicago, and instead of being you're probably too young, but they used to be known as the Blow Jays, or they'd always be second. So they walked into the meetings in Chicago at the Hyatt Regency at the O'Hare, and they walked in there. They were like, you thought it was John Wayne, they'd beaten the Dodgers, which was unusual, sunny LA versus Toronto, and they'd won that argument. And then they did on the Sunday night, they did the trade for Devon White, and then 3 days later was Alomar and Carter, that turned the whole franchise around.
Well, I know the Chicago Cubs as the lovable losers before 2016 when they won the World Series. So, but that's an interesting story, and I know that there's been a lot of reshowing of famous Blue Jays games and moments on Sportsnet during this sports hiatus. And the one game to me that I want to chat with you about is the 1992 Game 4 ALCS, Robbie Alomar's home run. And there's a lot of debate that went on about whether that home run happened to be the most significant in Blue Jays history. A lot of people say off the top, well, Joe Carter, because it's the second walk-off to win a World Series. But more that I think about it, that Alomar home run was extremely significant given the context of what happened in 1985 and 1989.
Right. That was if I remember, that was Thanksgiving Day weekend. It was a Saturday. It was a day game, and they put Oakland had a big lead, and they kind of banged around their relievers, and La Russa was forced to bring in Eckersley, I think, with nobody out in the eighth inning, and he got out of it, and he struck out, I think it was Sprague, and he shot the imaginary pistol into the Toronto dugout. And the best description I heard from anyone about that was from Pat Henkin, and he said it was like we were like, our dugout was like the sidelines of a high school football game. Like, oh yeah, So then somebody let off of the walk the next half inning, and Alomar hit the 2-run homer, and it was a no doubter. And people talk about Batista, but this was for Robbie Alomar to throw his arms in the air. We'd never seen anything like that before, and it was a no doubter. And the best line I ever heard about that was about 3 or 4 years later, after they're both in the Hall of Fame. 3 or 4 years after they're both in the Hall of Fame, Eckersley says to Robbie, he says, "Why did you do what you did?" And Robbie said, "Why did you do what you did?"
Oh, that's a good story. Yeah, and it definitely goes down as one of the great Blue Jays home runs in franchise history. Bob, I want to flash forward, of course, to 2015 and 2016. And for a young Blue Jays follower like me and so many others, like, this was the first time that I've seen, and for many others, we've seen the Blue Jays be competitive and be a playoff team. And I think it goes back to, during that, trade deadline, they're right around 500. And GM Alex Anthopoulos says, you know what, we're going to make these trades to get David Price, Troy Tulowitzki. You spend a lot of time in the book talking about that time and Alex Anthopoulos. Maybe just describe what it was like covering the team that was, again, 500, but then explodes, bringing an entire city and country together with baseball.
Yeah, it was. It's like, what are you going to do next? That's what it was like, because I think he got Tulowitzki and LaTroy Hawkins first, and then David Price came over, and then the third day they added the reliever from Seattle, and Ben Revere, who played an important part, uh, uh, playing the outfield, and he, uh, he just, I mean, at the time, I think the time of the first trade that night, they were 50 and 51. So at the end of the year, he's probably going to get fired.
Yeah.
So, like he went for it, and it ends a drought of 22 years, which to me was very, very significant.
And I think it was significant too, Bob, because I think, I mentioned earlier about more younger people tuning into the team, and you just saw a different clientele at the ballpark. Like, I've seen highlights of, 92, 93, and it's a relatively older demographic.
Yeah.
And now with, the Jays doing well in the social media era, a lot more younger people were going to the ballpark to support that team. It just felt like every day in September and August of 2015, Rogers Center was filled to the brim.
Yeah, the other thing that I noticed that wasn't there in 92 and 93 is that, Lucas, everybody was wearing a jersey, whether it was a Steve jersey or a Halliday jersey or whatever. But everybody it was a sea of blue. Like, I mean, I saw that once. The first time I ever saw it was Philadelphia Flyers. I had to do a hockey game during the Stanley Cup. The guy got sick, and everybody, like grown men, wearing jerseys. I'd never seen that before, and that happened here. It was, downtown, and people would wear them. I don't know if they were wearing them to work, but I'd see them on the train, on the GO train, and they were revved up about the team, and and when they win in Baltimore, they're winning like 15-1 or whatever, and Hawkins comes in to get the final 3 outs, and Gibbons gave him the effort. Gibbons gave him the ball, LaTroy Hawkins, because he had the most years of experience, and which he was very, very touched by, and it was a nice, somebody else, anybody probably could have gotten the outs, but he gave it to Hawkins, and somewhere in there, down by the third baseline, Alex was sitting, and they all started chanting, "Thank you, Alex! Thank you, Alex!" A bunch of fans from Toronto. And the other thing I want to mention is I never remember people traveling that much. I mean, every time you look at a Blue Jay game, they could be in Phoenix, or they could be at Dodger Stadium, and they'd go to commercial, and they'd flash a guy and his wife and his child, and they're all wearing Blue Jay stuff. And it was almost like, buy a shirt and you're going to get on TV or whatever. But they traveled well, as they say in college football.
Well, I noticed, Bob, Seattle, like when they had that annual Seattle series, it felt like a Toronto home game during that time. Like, it was just remarkable to see the flocks of fans going to support the team. And they were a fun team to watch. Like 2015, I'm going to be honest, like they were the best team in baseball going into the playoffs. Like the offense, and then couple that with the pitching. It's just unfortunate they couldn't hit it when it mattered in the ALCS.
Yeah. Well, I can remember we'd go to Detroit, and there'd be a lot of people from Western Ontario or from Windsor cheering for the Blue Jays if somebody hit a home run, or in Seattle, there'd always be people from Vancouver, and Minnesota, there'd always be people from, I guess, Winnipeg or Manitoba or Saskatchewan. But the thing is, now it's that year it was like everywhere. It didn't matter where they went. They could be in San Diego, and you'd see 2 guys sitting there with their Blue Jay gear on, and waving at the crowd, and cheering when they got a home run.
No, it was just sensational how Blue Jay fever just, went across Canada. And for me, as I said earlier, as a young person, like I had never seen this before. I just knew as the Blue Jays as, a team that was mainly mediocre, but had a few star players like Halliday and Delgado and others. But I want to get into that famous 2015 ALDS with the Texas Rangers and most notably Game 5. Sportsnet had a watch party a few weeks back where they brought on some of the familiar guests like Gibbons and Jose Bautista and the umpire. And I'm just curious, Bob, because you wrote, at the time, a really fascinating oral history about that game. Was that just the wackiest, craziest game that you had ever seen? Because I know you've watched more baseball than I, but I don't think I'll ever see a seventh inning as crazy as that, maybe ever.
No, the thing about the inning was I've written before, and it's in the book. Like I think it's the most exciting inning in franchise history not to knock Joe Carter's home run. That was it won a World Series. Like you said, there's only two that ended. Mazeroski's in 1960, which earned me a detention. I had the transistor radio in my pocket and the little earplug in my ear. And when Mazeroski hit the home run, I went, yes. And Mrs. Lake said, Robert, you have a detention. That was grade 6.
Wow. But that's a really good story.
But the thing is, the top of the ninth, there was nothing. It was nothing. It was 1, 2, 3, or maybe it was 1, 2, 3, 4. But after Martin threw the ball and it hit the bat, and they were throwing the beers, and they had people up on the police had people marshaling at Queen's Park. I've never heard of that before. So, I have no idea what would have happened if Toronto had lost that game on the throwback.
Well, yeah.
Because Dale Scott initially he waved it off.
Did you know, Bob, at the time, again, when you're in the press box, it may be at first a little bit, tough to understand what's going on. But did you know right away that rule was going to be,
I never seen that in all my years. I'd never seen that a guy hit, and Russell had never hit the bat before. And Gibbons argued that he stuck his bat out over the plate, which he didn't, and he didn't leave the batter's box, so he was just fixing his sleeve or whatever. And Gibbons had the good line, when the beers started to come from the 500 level. Of course, they put the weak arms, Lucas, in the 500 level, and all he did was hit the people in the 100 level. But
yeah.
Gibbons said he was out there the one time, and a beer went flying by him, and he said, "Oh, I bet you Beeston threw that. Paul Beeston threw it, the president at the time." And then he said he saw it scoot across the carpet, and he said, "Oh no, that beer's full. There's no way Beeston would have thrown a full beer."
Oh yeah, well it was and look, different cities get targeted for their fans, and normally people say about Toronto and Canadians, oh, they're so nice, they're this. Yeah. But it was just shocking, and I don't think I've seen it again. Just the level of it was about to explode almost.
Yeah.
If that bottom half of the 7th inning didn't happen. And
yeah.
It's just crazy to think and again, as I mentioned earlier, that Sportsnet had a watch party and they brought Bautista back on, and he says that he still gets chills watching that, home run again. But I feel like the lead up in that bottom half and all the errors from Elvis Andrews and Adrian Beltre that are just so you just can't even imagine that happening, just one after the next, leading to that amazing bat flip by Bautista.
Yeah. Well, I think it went Andrus and then Moreland, and then they put the wheel play on, and Andrus dropped the ball at third. But I was told by a couple of baseball guys that the worst error of the whole inning was Odor, the second baseman, because remember when Donaldson popped up?
Yes.
He just kind of backpedaled, taking baby steps. If he'd have turned and taken 3 or 4 strides, it's in his back pocket. And they did get the out at second because Revere turned his back on the ball, but the run scored on the play from when the ball fell in. But the problem is they had or no, I was going to tell you about Edwin. Yeah, so I said, "What did you think?" And Edwin Encarnacion, and he says he was eating soup, right? He says, "I don't think the baseball gods were." He said, "I think the baseball guys were watching, and they didn't want the game to end that way on a throwback to the pitcher off the bat." And that's certainly what happened. And the other thing I was going to tell you about Batista is at Yankee Stadium they'll show Chris Chambliss in the batter's box, and he hits the walk-off home run, but they just show him standing, and people just start cheering. And I always thought Toronto fans were reactionary. You know, like we're in New York, they're standing applauding with 2 strikes, cheering the guy on to do something. Well, when they started showing that Batista clip the next year, I mean, people were cheering, like they were coming out of their seats, like they recognized, they knew what was coming, and they were still excited about it. And it was fun. It was a good. I don't praise the throwing the beer cans, but I praise that they were into the. They recognized what was about to happen in the Batista clip.
No, for sure. And you mentioned Edwin Encarnacion, and it's interesting because in that game 5, he had the home run to tie the game against Texas 2-2. And then a year later in 2016, he's the hero in that famous Baltimore wildcard game that was so great for Toronto, and it'll live in infamy amongst Baltimore fans because of Buck Showalter's managerial decision.
Yeah, there was a lot of guys, a lot of managers. Visiting managers. They won't use their closer. They won't use their closer unless there's a save situation, and that's what Buck did. And I remember that's the same as Jimmy Williams in 1987 in Detroit when they lost the final 7 games of the season, I guess, the meltdown in Motown or whatever everybody called it. But so somebody asked, it was a guy from California, he asked Jimmy, he said, "Why didn't you use Hanky?" And he says, "Well, we didn't have the lead. It was a tie game." And the guy says, "What about tied pennant races?" And Jimmy shrugged, So Hanky never pitched in Detroit, the final game, I mean.
Yeah, and Bob, I mean, you talk a lot about in the book, about this 2015 and 2016 season, and what do you want? I mean, for a reader picking up that book and reading, I mean, what do you want Blue Jays fans to remember about those 2 years? Because they were 2 different seasons, but I mean, for me at least, like it felt like 2 years that were amazing, but you wish that it could continue on, but maybe,
right.
It couldn't, obviously, and now I think a lot of Blue Jays followers are just yearning for that return to what it was like in 2015 and 16.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, they like you mentioned earlier, like when they moved into the place, I think we had a story when they moved into the Skydome, the average age was 52 or something like that. And they had budgeted for construction deaths, like I think 6 or 7, and they didn't have any, which is tremendous. But
the first, I think it was the first 3 homestands. It was like 6 heart attacks. People walking up to their seats in the 500 level
Wow.
because it was such stupid. And but then I think it was, I don't know, it was 14 or 15. I remember doing a story, and the average age was like mid 30s. I mean, they changed the dynamics of the place with that the WestJet flight deck, which is, I've never been out there, but I'm told it's like a bar where you just stand around. And Andrew McCutcheon didn't like it. I didn't like that either. But
Yeah, if it makes you feel better, I haven't. I've stayed far clear from out there, but I do agree with you though that the demographic definitely changed. But there were just exciting moments and exciting characters, Bob. Like even in, obviously we've talked about 2015, but even in 2016, like you think of the Encarnacion walk-off homer, and then in the ALDS against Texas in that game 3, Donaldson sliding to the plate to win the game to advance to the ALCS. Obviously, again, cut short by the Cleveland Indians, but still, like, just 2 incredible years that just showed how baseball can bring an entire city and an entire country together to support their team.
yes, it was. I think the entire country was behind them in '92 and '93 as well. And,
of course.
But you know, they, like you mentioned, watch parties. They were having watch parties in Regina and Winnipeg and Vancouver. It's you know, we're not as loud, or we don't show as much bravado as the Americans, but we're just as proud. I'll tell you that. I mean, there was that one fellow that came in from Chicago, and he didn't vote for Delgado. He didn't have Delgado on his ballot. So and he said something nasty on the radio, something like it's like going to the third world and Canada, and the money's different colored and all this. So I had written it, I think, on the Friday, and then way down at the other end of the press box, he didn't stand up for the anthem, and some TV guy or radio guy yelled at him, and next thing you know, there's almost a fight. Wow. And it was, you know, we got some proud people here, I would say.
No, for sure. And speaking of proud, I mean, you know, we're obviously reminiscing about old baseball because there isn't any MLB baseball to talk about right now because of the pandemic. But earlier this year, there was some proud Canadian baseball news, and that was Larry Walker getting inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. That ceremony is going to be in 2021, where he and Derek Jeter will be inducted. But do you have any memorable stories, Bob, of your interactions with Larry? Because when he came on the airwaves just to talk about, you know, what it meant to him, he was just such a humble guy, and what a career he had, obviously, in making Canada proud for baseball.
Yeah, he, I remember that's, it just so happened that Minnesota's first game was in Colorado. And so he sent a bat and a jersey over to Morneau, and he said, "Make Canada proud." And that's Morneau. I would say Morneau did that, winning an MVP, and he wanted to play in the last WBC, but he was injured. He was injured, and he couldn't play. But Walker, I think I remember the last night in St. Louis lost the World Series, and he always said the whole story going through the postseason was, "Are you going to play next year? Are you going to play next year?" So I get there late. He's talking to 2 or 3 guys on the field, and he's crying. And I said, what did the guy just ask you? And he says, you want me to cry again? And I said, well, yeah, if you're going to tell me you're going to give the answer to whether you're going to play again. And he said, no, he said, this is it. I'm hanging it up. So that's a memory. And the memory, Tracy Ringlesby and I, we were invited to go on Walker's tour of Cooperstown, and just to see the big lumps smile all the time. He's just like a kid in the candy store, and what you see is what you get with Walker. He's like wearing SpongeBob pants. Like, what is that? You know, like
that made me laugh when he when he came on. I think it was Tim and Sid when they announced that he got inducted, and him just coming on with SpongeBob SquarePants. It's like, oh, Larry's quite the character.
Yeah. And then you've seen that commercial on MLB Network where he's relaxing and Leiter's talking about him. I said, man, you're a ham to do that, because in Montreal he would always turn down, and in Colorado he would turn down endorsements, because he says, I get paid enough to play baseball. I don't need any money. And he said, I was staring at a green wall, because they dub it in afterwards. Mm-hmm. The Leiter part, Al Leiter. But he was. When I think of people that Ferguson Jenkins has done a lot for Canadians in this country, baseball playing Canadians or baseball minded Canadians, and I would say Walker would be right there or something.
And also this year, it was unfortunate that Tony Fernandez passed away, and you had the chance to cover him, and Tony's such an important figure in Blue Jays history, because not only was he involved in a trade to get Alomar and Carter, but he came back as well. So how will he be remembered in the history of the Blue Jays?
Oh, I wrote one the other day where Ernie Witt called him. He said, his nickname was Cabeza because of his head. I guess his head was bigger. I don't know. But Ernie said he called him Mr. Gadget because anything, whether it was arm strengthening, bands or whatever, he was always doing that. He would get somebody, a bat boy or somebody, to flip him unpopped seeds of popcorn, and he'd swing at, meaning if he could hit the popcorn, he could hit a baseball. He was revolutionary for his ideas. And I can remember being here in '85 and the last 6 weeks, and Gillick called him the MVP of the team, which was if you just go by wins, that's their best team ever, the 1985 team. And it was basically a 23-man roster. They had 2 Rule 5 guys with Lou Thornton and Manny Lee.
And Bob, I want to end off because, look, we're, as baseball followers, we're patiently awaiting a return, but I feel like we're entering a new normal, and certainly it will be for the first little while, with no fans in the stands and whatnot. But how do you envision the coverage of baseball changing, whether from reporting to writing? Because a lot of these outlets are trying to find ways now to write about baseball and produce content. But I just think what we had before is not going to look like what is going to be when baseball returns in terms of media coverage.
I think you're right. I mean, I saw earlier there where they deemed that the media wouldn't be in the clubhouse. So that means the guy has to go to an interview room. And of course, when he goes to an interview room, he's not as relaxed as he would have been standing at his locker talking to 2 guys. I do not have the answer to your question. I'm not able to say, oh yeah, in '74 they did this. I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be the only game I've seen without fans is the White Sox game at Baltimore when they had the riots.
Mm-hmm.
But and players didn't like it. But the thing I don't understand is that Florida idea, the Florida Arizona idea, where they'll put people in their hotels and keep them there. I don't think that'll work. The players and test them every day. And now they're talking about playing in each team would play in their own park. So I don't know. That would have to go. I guess the borders will eventually open.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Bob, and I think it's it's so hard to speculate because we don't really know what the course of the virus is going to be, and I just think that, but I do think though that whether it's whether it's the broadcasting, whether it's the reporting, I just think that for certainly younger media members like myself, you have to be willing to adapt and go with the trends because things are changing. Like these Zoom calls are becoming more and more prevalent now in sports media. And you mentioned not going into the clubhouse. I mean, obviously for public safety reasons now, but what if it becomes normal and that rule still applies, right? And that was the concern for a lot of media members because those clubhouse interactions are so vital, this, in building a story.
Well, I think it's going to be difficult to get I don't know, Bobichette or Guerrero on a Zoom call. After the game, they'll go across the hall to the press room, but I don't like. I've spoken to people who said, "Yeah, I can't wait for it to get back, but I don't know if I'm going to go to the game. I don't know if I'm going to go and sit, get on the elevator and sit 5 feet away from some guy. I don't know where he's been. Like people are at least my age, old people. They're worried about this because that's where it goes, and now it's spreading to younger age groups too. So I'm no expert on that, Lucas.
No, and neither am I. And thank goodness that it's in the hands of a lot more intelligent people in figuring that out. But Bob Elliott, he's the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Baseball Network. He's a Hall of Fame baseball writer, author of If the Walls Could Talk. And if you're a Blue Jays fan wanting some behind-the-scenes look into what those teams were like, you should definitely consider reading it. Bob, it's a pleasure speaking with you, and thanks so much for coming on.
Pleasure speaking to you, Lucas, and thanks for all you do.